Now while they thus spake and conversed one with the other, Diomedes of the loud war cry leapt upon Aeneas, knowing full well that Apollo himself had spread his arms over him. Yet reverenced he not even the great god, but still was eager to slay Aeneas, and strip from him his glorious armor. So thrice he leapt on him, fain to slay him, and thrice Apollo beat back his glittering shield. And when the fourth time he sprang at him like a god, then Apollo the far-darter spake to him with terrible shout, Think, Tydides, and shrink, nor desire to match thy spirit with God's, seeing there is no comparison of the race of immortal gods and of men that walk upon the earth. We're back on the battlefield, and Diomedes has been very busy. Just before we left, Apollo had taken over the role of protecting Aeneas from Diomedes after Aphrodite had dropped him. And Diomedes is giving Apollo a hard time. Despite being protected by Apollo, Diomedes has attacked Aeneas 3 times. Athene has not given Diomedes permission to attack any god other than Aphrodite. And the narrator has verified for us that Diomedes is well aware of Apollo's presence protecting Aeneas. So our hero is on thin ice here. About to attack a 4th time, Apollo warns Diomedes to think about what he's doing and to fear in this stunning speech of his we just heard, which sums up perfectly that gap between mortals and immortals which Dione had struggled to articulate. As Apollo has said, there is just no comparison between the two. End of story. Apollo's message gets through, and Diomedes relents. His backing down here is good. It's very good. Diomedes has just passed the real test, and it's a relief to see that Diomedes has mastered that fury which had been his father Tydeus' undoing. Much later on in the Iliad, we will see another Greek hero attempt to defy Apollo, and again in that case, Apollo will tolerate such behavior exactly 3 times again, before giving a warning. I don't know if there is some importance to this, but it's an interesting parallel to note. So said he, and Tydides shrank a short space backwards to avoid the wrath of Apollo the far-darter. Then Apollo set Aeneas away from the throng in holy Pergamos, where his temple stood. There Leto and archer Artemis healed him in the mighty sanctuary and gave him glory. But Apollo of the silver bow made a wraith like unto Aeneas' self, and in such armor as his, and over the wraith Trojans and goodly Achaeans each hewed the other's bucklers on their breasts, their round shields, and fluttering targes. With Diomedes finally off his case, Apollo can do something with Aeneas other than get chased around the battlefield. And oh my, what Apollo does is very, very interesting. There are so many disguises and tricks in the Iliad, masks and illusions. So first off, Apollo now secretly has sent Aeneas off to Pergamos, which is the main citadel within the city of Troy, where the goddesses Leto and Artemis, who are Apollo's mother and sister, they heal Aeneas. And this is what is happening to the real Aeneas right now. Just set that fact aside. Because meanwhile, on the battlefield, Apollo has placed an unconscious eidolon of Aeneas, a passed out fake, a mannequin made of nothing but air. You'll remember our biography of Helen, where we discussed the theory that the Helen in Troy is an eidolon, and that the real Helen is in Egypt for the duration of the war. That's a theory which people have had about Helen since ancient times. The playwright Euripides even included it in his play about Helen. But with Helen, it's only a theory. The eidolon is an optional way of interpreting the Iliad that's not contradicted by anything within the text as far as Helen goes. But it's also not explicitly stated anywhere either. You can believe that Helen is an eidolon or not. Here with Aeneas, though, we have something very, very much like that, but here it's not a theory. It's very much true and outright stated by the narrator. Why is Apollo doing this? Apollo places this fake Aeneas on the battlefield for the 2 sides to fight over, perhaps as a distraction to make his escape from Diomedes. I'll add a little thought of my own here. It's very possible to read the Iliad as an action story, especially in any of the mini books like 5 here, which are almost all battle. And you could get the impression that the Iliad is a glorification of war. And its message to millennia of readers has been, hey guys, war's pretty great. But you'd be missing the forest for the trees if you saw the Iliad like that. There are little moments like this placement of an eidolon, and big moments like the overall mythology where so many of the heroes have difficult returns home, if they make it home at all, with little to show for their years of effort, by the way, that imply the overall message of the Iliad is one that we simply would not expect from its time, which is that war isn't worth it. It's ultimately pointless. We fight for what? The amusement of the gods? And a scene like this one we're entering now, where both sides are valiantly fighting for the control of a mannequin, this is like a little microcosm of the whole Iliad mythos right here. So we're about to enter another good old-fashioned corpse squabble, but unlike our earlier one in this book where they fought over Pandaros' dead body, this time it's not even a real dead body. It's nothing. An eidolon is made out of air, literally. There is no honor at stake. There's no protecting your dead friend from the enemy disrespecting his remains. They're fighting over nothing. That's your message right there. Then to impetuous Ares said Phoebus Apollo, Ares, Ares, blood-stained bane of mortals, thou stormer of walls, wilt thou not follow after this man and withdraw him from the battle, this Tydides, who would now fight even with Father Zeus? First in close fight he wounded the Cyprian in her hand hard by the wrist, and then sprang he upon myself like unto a god. So saying, he sate himself upon the height of Pergamos, and baleful Ares entered among the Trojan ranks, and aroused them in the likeness of fleet Acamas, captain of the Thracians. On the heaven-nurtured sons of Priam he called, saying, O ye sons of Priam, the heaven-nurtured king, how long will ye yet suffer your host to be slain of the Achaeans? Shall it be even until they fight about our well-builded gates? Low lieth the warrior whom we esteemed like unto goodly Hector, even Aeneas, son of Anchises, great of heart. Go to now, let us save from the tumult our valiant comrade. So saying, he aroused the spirit and soul of every man. Apollo seems to run into Ares, who last we knew was going to re-enter the battle to get back at Diomedes for hurting Aphrodite. Apollo asks Ares to take care of Diomedes, which we know Ares was already going to do. And from our perspective, it's not clear why Ares hadn't already come back to battle. And Apollo decides to take a break, perching himself on top of that citadel to watch the action. I guess tussling with Diomedes for 5 minutes really wore him out. Ares now comes onto the scene, taking on the form of Acamas of Thrace, a Trojan ally, to call upon all Trojans and their allies to attack Diomedes, rallying their side. This is a role that Athene often plays for the Greeks, and more often Apollo for the Trojans, to excite them to great deeds in battle. But here it's Ares doing the battle rage rousing. The fight for the fake corpse of Aeneas is on. There at Sarpedon, sorely chode noble Hector. Hector, where now is the spirit gone that erst thou hadst? Thou saidst forsooth that without armies or allies thou wouldst hold the city alone with thy sister's husbands and thy brothers. But now can I not see any of these, neither perceive them. But they are cowering like hounds about a lion, and we are fighting that are but allies among you. Yea, I being an ally am come from very far. Far off is Lycia upon eddying Xanthos, where I left my dear wife and infant son, and left my great wealth, that each one coveteth that is in need. Yet for all that I urge on my Lycians, and myself am eager to fight my man, though here is naught of mine, such as the Achaeans might plunder or harry. But thou standeth. Nay, thou dost not even urge all thine hosts to abide and guard their wives. Only beware lest, as though tangled in meshes of all ensnaring flax, ye be made unto your foemen a prey and a spoil, and they will soon lay waste your well-peopled city. Thee it behoveth to give thought to all these things, both by night and day, and to beseech the captains of thy far-famed allies to hold on unflinchingly, and so shalt thou put away their sore rebuking from thee. Roused by Ares, Sarpedon, mortal son of Zeus, looks around for Hector. Sarpedon is a Trojan ally from Lycia on the far south side of Asia Minor, who wants to get Hector back into the fight, wants Hector, as the preeminent hero of the Trojan side, to become more present and boost morale, because so far today, it's just been Diomedes stomping all over the Trojans. We're going to see a lot more of Sarpedon later on in the Iliad. He becomes fairly important for a while. But that's much later. For now, just recognize that he's an important Trojan ally and the catalyst now to get Hector back into the fray. So spake Sarpedon, and his words stung Hector to the heart. Forthwith he leapt from his chariot in his armor to the earth, and brandishing two keen spears went everywhere through the host, urging them to fight, and roused the dread battle cry. So they were rallied and stood to face the Achaeans, and the Argives withstood them in close array and fled not. Even as a wind carrieth the chaff about the sacred threshing floors when men are winnowing, what time golden-haired Demeter in rush of wind maketh division of grain and chaff, and so the chaff heaps grow white, so now grew the Achaeans white with falling dust, which in their midst the horses' hooves beat up into the brazen heaven, as fight was joined again, and the charioteers wheeled round. Thus bear they forward the fury of their hands. Sarpedon's plan has worked. Hector has been shamed into getting back into the fight. Hector rides up in his chariot and jumps down to the ground, and goes among the Trojans, bearing a spear in each hand, rousing them to face the Greeks. So Sarpedon rallied a guy, who's now rallying all the guys. The Trojans are assembling, reforming their line, getting ready for a much-delayed counterattack. Facing the assembling Trojan forces, the Greeks tighten up their ranks too, reforming their line as well. This battle is about to become more than just the Diomedes show it's been up to until now, although Diomedes' finest moment is still to come. And there is a perfect, silent face-off moment, like in a Western movie. Dust has been kicked up into the air by the hooves of countless horses, and it settles upon the ranks of warriors, Trojans facing Greeks, making them all ghostly white. The silence is broken with a sudden, deafening yell. Battle has been resumed. And impetuous Ares drew round them a veil of night to aid the Trojans in battle, ranging everywhere. So fulfilled he the behest of Phoebus Apollo of the golden sword, who bade him rouse the Trojan spirits, when he beheld Pallas Athene departed, for she was helper to the Danaans. And Apollo himself sent forth Aeneas from his rich sanctuary, and put courage in the heart of him, shepherd of the hosts. So Aeneas took his place amid his comrades, and they were glad to see him come among them alive and sound and full of valiant spirit. Yet they questioned him not at all, for all the toil forbade them that the god of the silver bow was stirring, and Ares bane of men, and strife raging insatiably. Now, this is a big change. Ares casts an unnatural darkness over the battlefield to aid the Trojans. This will keep those inside the darkness from seeing what's going on outside of it. And because the darkness has been cast by Ares on behalf of the Trojans, their spirits are moved to greater courage by it and by Ares' presence. Whereas the darkness is going to have the opposite effect upon the Greeks, who have no god on the battlefield encouraging them at this time. We don't know exactly when Athene left the battlefield, but we know she's not here now, because we just saw her up on Olympus, getting sarcastic with Zeus. The darkness of Ares is not only important in terms of its psychological effect of disheartening the Greeks, but it's also going to conceal what Apollo does next, which is crazy. Remember, after swapping out the real, injured Aeneas and replacing him with an eidolon for everyone to be fighting over, Apollo had the real Aeneas healed. But Aeneas gets exactly 0 recuperation time because Apollo is bringing him back immediately into the battle. That's right, we've got fake eidolon Aeneas and real Aeneas both on the battlefield at the same time. It's like one of those wacky sitcom plots where someone has 2 dates at the same time and they have to keep the ruse going, only with battle and slaughter. The Trojans, who see the real Aeneas back, and apparently fine as he resumes fighting, are further encouraged by this miracle. And the darkness makes it so no one can see very far. So no one person can see both the real Aeneas and the eidolon one. And on the other side, the two Iontes, and Odysseus and Diomedes, stirred the Danaans to fight. Yet these of themselves feared neither the Trojans' violence nor assaults, but stood like mists that Cronos' son setteth in windless air on the mountain tops at peace, while the might of the north wind sleepeth, and all of the violent winds that blow with keen breath and scatter apart the scattering clouds. Even so the Danaans withstood the Trojans steadfastly and fled not. And Atrides ranged through the throng, exhorting instantly, "My friends, quit you like men, and take heart of courage, and shun dishonor in one another's eyes amid the stress of battle. Of men that shun dishonor, more are saved than slain. but for them that flee is neither glory found, nor any safety. So saying, he darted swiftly with his javelin and smote a foremost warrior, even great-hearted Aeneas's comrade, Dicoon, son of Pergassos, whom the Trojans held in like honor with Priam's sons, because he was swift to do battle amid the foremost. Him Lord Agamemnon smote with his dart upon the shield, and it stayed not the spear, but the point passed through, so that he drave it through the belt into his nethermost belly, and he fell with a crash, and his armor clanged upon him. Meanwhile, on the Greek side, the two Ajaxes, Odysseus and Diomedes, are rousing their men to fight harder. The narrator has this magnificent image of these four warriors, comparing them to the clouds that cluster unmoving round the tops of tall mountains, while the winds bluster about above and below. These four Greek heroes are the unmoved mists surrounding the mountain heights, steady and unafraid, far above the fray. In the battle right now, these four Greek heroes are the majestic clouds of heaven, providing confidence to the Greeks. The steadfastness of these four is contrasted with Agamemnon, who is again running around trying to get the Greeks excited to fight. Frantic, and yet not ineffective, Agamemnon kills one of Aeneas's companions with a spear to the belly. Then did Aeneas slay two champions of the Danaans, even the sons of Diocles, Crethon, and Orsilochos, whose father dwelt in Stablish Pheræ, a man full of substance, whose lineage was of the river Alpheus, that floweth in broad stream through the land of the Pylians. Alpheus begat Orsilochos, to be king of many men, and Orsilochos begat great-hearted Diocles, and of Diocles were born twin sons, even Crethon and Orsilochos, well skilled in all the ways of war. Now, when these were of full age, they bare the Argives' company on their black ships to Ilios, home of horses, to win recompense for Atreus' sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus. But now the issue of death shrouded them about. Like them, two lions on the mountain tops are nurtured by their dam in the deep forest thickets, and these harry the kine and goodly sheep, and make havoc of the farmsteads of men, till in their turn they too are slain at men's hands with the keen bronze. In such wise were these twain vanquished at Aeneas' hands, and fell like tall pine trees. Aeneas kills two Greeks named Crethon and Orsilochos, twin brothers, yet another example of the two brothers dying trope. There's not much backstory on these two, despite the fact that they are referred to here as champions, and in Peter Green's translation they're called prime fighters. Their sister is married to the Greek physician Machaon, so at least there's this tiny morsel of backstory on this pair of brothers. But as this is their only mention in the Iliad, so I don't know how much they warranted being called prime fighters or champions. I try to dig up interesting backstories on these minor characters for you when I can, but sometimes I just come up short. But Menelaus, dear to Ares, had pity of them in their fall, and strode through the forefront, harnessed in flashing bronze, brandishing his spear, and Ares stirred his courage with intent that he might fall beneath Aeneas' hand. But Antilochus, great-hearted Nestor's son, beheld him, and strode through the forefront, because he feared exceedingly for the shepherd of the host, lest aught befall him and disappoint them utterly of their labor. So those two were now holding forth their hands and sharp spears, each against the other, eager to do battle, when Antilochus came and stood hard by the shepherd of the host. But Aeneas faced them not, keen warrior though he was, when he beheld two men abiding side by side. So these haled away the corpses to the Achaeans' host, and laid the hapless twain in their comrades' arms, and themselves turned back and fought on amid the foremost. What the twins Crethon and Orsilochos do accomplish is that their deaths get Menelaus angry. Why does Menelaus care that much about these characters who only appeared in order to be immediately killed off? It's a trap! Ares is giving Menelaus courage now, filling him with rage at these twins' deaths as a lure to draw Menelaus forward, where Aeneas can get to him easier. And Menelaus falls for it. He moves past the Greek lines to get back at Aeneas. The trap is working. Ares intends to help Aeneas kill Menelaus. But the Greeks are always quick to defend Menelaus. His remaining alive is important to the very purpose of this war, which is to defend the marriage of Menelaus to Helen. And so, when the hero Antilochus, son of elderly Nestor and one of the very youngest of the Greek heroes, when Antilochus sees Menelaus out there by himself among the Trojans, he quickly joins Menelaus out there beyond the Greek line. Once Aeneas sees that Menelaus is not alone anymore, but Antilochus is standing side by side with him, he abandons Ares' plan. Ares' attempt at a cunning plan has been foiled, and with Aeneas retreating, Menelaus and Antilochus are able to get those twin brothers' bodies back behind the Greek lines. Then slew they Pylaemenes, peer of Ares, captain of the great-hearted Paphlagonians, bearers of the shield. Him, as he stood still, Atreus' son, spear-famed Menelaus, pierced with his javelin, smiting upon the collarbone, and Antilochus hurled at Medon, his squire and charioteer, and Tymneus' brave son, even as he was wheeling the whole-hooved horses, and with a stone smote his elbow in the midst, so the reins, white with ivory, fell from his hands to earth, even into the dust. Then Antilochus sprang upon him and drave the sword into his temple, and he fell, gasping, from the well-wrought chariot headlong into the dust on crown and shoulders. A while he stood there, being lighted on deep sand, until his horses spurned him and cast him to earth, even in the dust, and them Antilochus lashed and drave them to the Achaeans' host. Menelaus and Antilochus returned quickly to battle, attacking Pylaemenes and Medon, two men from Paphlagonia, which was on the central part of the Black Sea coast in what is now Turkey, so it was about 500 miles to the east of Troy. Menelaus outright kills Pylaemenes with a javelin to the upper chest. Don't feel too bad about Pylaemenes, however, as we'll see him again in Book 13. How? It's called a Homeric nod. Nod as in Homer sometimes falls asleep and makes a continuity error, as he will with Pylaemenes when he forgets having killed him off here in Book 5 and brings him back in Book 13. At least it won't be Menelaus who kills him that second time. Antilochus has a harder time of it, as his opponent was driving a chariot while Antilochus was on foot. To take down his opponent, Antilochus first threw a stone at Medon, which caused him to drop the chariot reins and lose control of the horses. Then Antilochus jumped up onto the chariot and attacked Medon with a sword blow to the head. That's not quite the end of Medon's story, however. Medon's final ending is ignoble. After getting hit on the head with a sword, he falls from the chariot, dead, of course, landing head first into sand or dust, where he remained for a moment balanced absurdly on his head, doing this macabre handstand, before being trampled into the earth by his own panicked horses, which Antilochus then steals and drives behind the Greek lines. But Hector marked them across the ranks and sprang on them with a shout, and the battalions of the Trojans followed him in their might, and Ares led them on, and dread Enyo, she bringing ruthless turmoil of war, the while Ares wielded in his hands his monstrous spear, and ranged now before Hector's face, and now behind. Hector spots Menelaus and Antilochus there ahead of the Greek lines, and comes charging forward to attack. But he's not alone. He's got Ares with him, as well as the goddess Enyo, who is a female personification of war, and at least to Homer, not at all distinct from the goddess Eris, whom we heard about in the context of the lead-up to the Trojan War, where she was the cause of the strife between the three goddesses, Athene, Hera, and Aphrodite, leading to the beauty contest. But let's not get too far afield here, and suffice it to say Ares is here physically, with Enyo/Eris causing general havoc all around. And Ares is kind of orbiting Hector, unidentified as a god to the mortals, going before Hector, going behind him, making Hector the center of his attention and the receiver of his strength and the benefits of all this havoc. The momentum of battle is entirely with Hector now that he's got Ares with him. Menelaus and Antilochus, good fighters that they are, aren't any match for Hector accompanied by Ares. But unfortunately for Menelaus and Antilochus, they don't know that Ares and Enyo are here. They can feel the fear emanating from these gods, but all they see is Hector. And they see that Hector is accompanied by some unidentified mortal, but they don't know that unknown person is really Ares in disguise. These two Greeks don't have the power that Diomedes does to see through the disguises of the gods. So other than the onset of fear in their hearts, they don't really know just how dangerous their situation has suddenly become. Then Diomedes of the loud war cry shuddered to behold him, And even as a shiftless man crossing a great plain cometh on a swift streaming river flowing on to the sea, and seeing it boil with foam springeth backwards, even so now Tydides shrank back and spake to the host, Friends, how marvel we that noble Hector is a spearman and bold man of war? Yet ever is there beside him some god that wardeth off destruction, even as now Ares is there by him in likeness of a mortal man. But with faces towards the Trojans still give ground backwards, neither be desirous to fight amain with gods. So said he, and the Trojans came very close upon them. Diomedes, still with the gift of Athene to see the gods amidst the battle, can see that Hector, approaching Menelaus and Antilochus, has Ares with him. And Diomedes calls out to the other Greeks, warning them of their danger and advising them to retreat, but specifically to retreat backward, that is, to keep their faces and weapons toward Hector and Ares while they walk backward, defending themselves but certainly not attacking Ares. Diomedes is being really practical here. Attacking Ares is a surefire way to die right quick, and he's following Athene's instructions to the letter. She forbade him from attacking any god except for Aphrodite. Diomedes is sensible and master of his father's fury. Then Hector slew two that knew well the battle joy, riding in one chariot, even Mnestheus and Anchialos. And the great Telamonian Aias had pity of them in their fall, and came hard by and darted with his bright javelin, and smote Amphios, son of Salagos, that dwelt in Pysos, a man rich in substance, rich in meadowland, but fate led him to bring succor to Priam and his sons. This is a turning of the tide, not just for the Aristeia of Diomedes, but in the movement of the battle, as the Greeks are now being pushed back, away from the city of Troy that they had been approaching. But the Aristeia of Diomedes isn't over yet, and this isn't a rout by any means, because what I feel is Diomedes' finest moment of Book 5 is yet to come. As for these two men that Hector just killed, Mnestheus and Anchialos, I came up short again on backstory for you. Not only do these two guys have literally zero backstory, but M.L. West, author of the comprehensive Iliad commentary book, The Making of the Iliad, Disquisition, and Analytical Commentary, calls them unknowns. Ouch. But again, as with our other recent no backstory characters whose deaths motivated Menelaus to great courage, the deaths of unknowns Mnestheus and Anchialos now motivates Telamonian Aias, aka Ajax the Great, to step up his performance. Why have two characters in quick succession been driven to seek revenge at any cost for someone they probably barely knew as just random other guys amid the hundreds at camp? Author Eric Culhead in the paper Dearness and Death in the Iliad discusses this emotion as one the ancient Greeks called eleos, which could be translated as pity, but that's insufficient. Because what Culhead says is that eleos is an emotion that starts off with one feeling with someone else's plight, not just for, which could simply be pity and it would stop at that. Eleos is feeling with someone else and then going on to be motivated to do something on their behalf. You see someone else get killed. You feel their pain and their grief and their life lost along with them. But they're helpless to get revenge on their killer. You're not helpless. You're in emotional synchronization with them already, so you take action. That's eleos. Menelaus felt eleos earlier on in Book 5 and was motivated to take action on behalf of those he felt along with. And now Telamonian Aias feels eleos upon witnessing the deaths of these two unknowns, Mnestheus and Anchialos. Aias wanted to attack Hector, but as Hector is protected by Ares, Aias attacks another Trojan instead, Amphios. There's a little confusion over exactly who this Amphios is. A person by this name is mentioned among the Trojans and their allies in the catalog, but he's given a different father there, and his hometown here is called Pysos. In the catalog, it was called Apaisos, making it unlikely that these are actually two different men named Amphios, and since the catalog and here are the only mentions of an Amphios in the Iliad, there's a strong possibility of a little error here, not a full Homeric nod, more just a little Homeric slip. So that's fun. Again, not really a backstory, but at least it's something interesting to chew on. Him, Amphios, Telamonian Aias smote upon the belt. and in his nether belly the far shadowing spear stuck, and he fell with a crash. Then glorious Aias ran at him to strip him of his armor, and the Trojans rained on him keen javelins glittering, and his shield caught many thereof. But he set his heel upon the corpse, and plucked forth the spear of bronze, only he could not strip from his shoulders all the fair armor therewith, being overwhelmed of spears. Moreover, he feared the haughty Trojans' stout defense, they being many and brave, that with their spears pressed on him, so that for all he was so great and valiant and proud, they thrust him from them, and he was shaken and shrank back. Telamonian Aias kills this mysterious Amphios, and goes to loot his corpse, but the Trojans fight him off, and he takes many spears to the shield. Aias is under too much pressure and has to leave without the loot. Abandoning loot is a sure sign that the Greeks are being pushed back. Again, it's not a rout, but the tide is clearly turned against them. Thus toiled these in violent battle, and Tlepolemus, son of Heracles, valiant and tall, was driven of forceful fate against godlike Sarpedon. Then when the twain were come nigh an onset on each other, even the son and grandson of Zeus the cloud-gatherer, then first to the other spake Tlepolemus. Sarpedon, counselor of the Lycians, why must thou be skulking here, being a man unskilled in battle? Falsely do men say that thou art offspring of Aegis-bearing Zeus, seeing thou art found lacking greatly beside those men that in days of old were born of Zeus. Ah, what an one do men say was mighty Heracles, even my father, the steadfast Lionheart, who erst came hither for Laomedon's mares, with but 6 ships and a scantier host, yet sacked the city of Ilios, and made her highways desolate. But thine is a base spirit, and thy folk are minishing. I ween that thou art in no wise come from Lycia to be a bulwark unto the Trojans, for all thy great strength, but that thou shalt be vanquished at my hand and pass the gates of Hades. Now the son of Zeus, Sarpedon, and the grandson of Zeus, Tlepolemus, son of Heracles, face off against each other. Both men are mortals, each having a mortal woman as a mother, despite both having gods as their fathers. Not only is Tlepolemus' grandfather a god, that is Zeus, but his father is also a god, as Heracles, uniquely among heroes, ascended to godhood upon his death. Sarpedon is a fairly important ally of the Trojans, who we will see come up again later in the Iliad, and he's the leader of the Lycians, an area on the southern coast of what is now modern Turkey, probably about 300 miles southeast of Troy. Here in the Iliad, Sarpedon's mother was Laodamia, daughter of Bellerophon, who was the hero who tamed and rode the flying horse Pegasus. Sarpedon has other accounts of his genealogy in other works, but as we've seen in a few other instances, including that of Aphrodite herself, the author of the Iliad had some unique takes on genealogy. The Greek, Heracles' son Tlepolemus, is the leader of the Greeks from the island of Rhodes. Tlepolemus mouths off and says Sarpedon must not be a son of Zeus because he's unskilled in battle. And then Tlepolemus mentions how Heracles sacked Troy because the previous king had reneged on his promise to give him the divine horses, the offspring of which Diomedes had recently stolen from Aeneas, remember? The prior king had promised Heracles for rescuing the princess of Troy. Then Sarpedon, captain of the Lycians, answered him, Tlepolemus, he verily overthrew holy Ilios by the folly of the proud man Laomedon, that rewarded his good deed with harsh upbraiding, and paid him not the steeds wherefore he came from afar. And for thee I say that slaughter and black death shall come about here at my hands. Vanquished by my spear, thou shalt yield to me my glory, and thy life to Hades of the goodly steeds. Sarpedon, son of Zeus and a Trojan ally, doesn't have much of a comeback here, other than to say Laomedon made a mistake by not paying Heracles for saving his daughter. And he says he'll kill Tlepolemus. So a fairly lackluster exchange leading into this confrontation. So spake Sarpedon, and Tlepolemus lifted his ashen spear, and both their long javelins sped from their hands together. Sarpedon smote the midst of his neck, and the grievous point passed right through, and the darkness of night fell on his eyes and shrouded him, and Tlepolemus with long spear smote the other's left thigh, and the point sped through, furiously, grazing the bone, but his father yet warded off destruction. Sarpedon and Tlepolemus have cast their spears at one another simultaneously, and the spears hit each other at the same time too. Sarpedon's spear pierces Tlepolemus' neck and breaks right through. This is a lethal strike. Tlepolemus' strike, however, only hits Sarpedon on the thigh. It grazes the bone, and while this is a severe injury that takes Sarpedon out of the fight for now, it's not lethal, but it is immobilizing. He's got a giant spear stuck right through his leg. Sarpedon's companions start to carry him away from the fighting, but they don't get very far. Odysseus has seen Tlepolemus slain and is enraged, more Ilios. But Odysseus gets enraged in a way that only Odysseus gets enraged, because Odysseus doesn't get red with rage the way everyone else does. Odysseus gets cold and calculating. Odysseus is always thinking. There's a part of his mind that's always up above, away from the situation, viewing it from a distance, viewing things the way his divine patroness Athene would. Odysseus sees Sarpedon being carried away from battle and sees someone vulnerable, someone who's experiencing a lot of fear, sure, but someone whose vulnerability means they could experience a lot more fear right about now. So his goodly comrades bear away godlike Sarpedon from the battle, but the long spear, dragging, was heavy upon him, and no man marked it or took thought in their haste to draw the ashen spear out from his thigh, that he might stand upright. Such labor had they intending him. And over against them the well-grieved Achaeans bare Tlepolemus from the battle. And noble Odysseus of the patient soul marked it, and his heart was stirred within him. Then doubted he in mind and soul whether first to pursue the son of Zeus, the loud thunderer, or take the lives of the common sort of the Lycians. But it was not destined to great-hearted Odysseus to slay with his keen blade the mighty son of Zeus. So Athene turned his fury upon the multitude of the Lycians. Then slew he Corianos, and Alastor, and Chromios, and Alcandros, and Halios, and Noemon, and Pyrtanus. And yet more Lycians had noble Odysseus slain, but that great Hector of the glancing helm was swift to mark him, and strode through the forefront of the battle, harnessed in flashing bronze, and brought terror to the Danaans. But Sarpedon, the son of Zeus, was glad at his coming, and spake to him a word of pain. O son of Priam, let me not now be left a prey unto the Danaans, but bring me succor. Howbeit, thereafter, let my life depart from me in your city, seeing it might not be that I should return home to my dear native land, to make glad my dear wife and infant son. The Lycians, countrymen of Sarpedon, who were carrying him wounded off the battlefield, were in a bit of a hurry, and so they failed to remove that giant spear from his leg. This kind of rendered Sarpedon immobile. A giant spear sticking through the leg might do that to you. So while Odysseus had at first considered attacking Sarpedon, Athene, always his guide in particular, directs him instead to attack those Lycians. This is extra cold, because when they set him down on the ground to defend themselves against Odysseus, Sarpedon is left to worry, helplessly. Will I be left lying on the ground wounded and helpless until Odysseus finishes off my friends and then comes for me? Very Odysseus, very Athene. This is prime time, and if you love this, stay tuned for the Odyssey, where you'll get a whole lot more of Odysseus and Athene teaming up. Odysseus kills off a mass of named foes here, 7 of them, and would have gotten more of them. But then Hector goes by, the havoc of Ares in his wake. We lose track of Odysseus for now, and Sarpedon, from his position lying helplessly on the ground, calls out to Hector for help. So said he, but Hector of the glancing helm spake no word to him, but hastened on, desirous with all speed to thrust back the Argives and take the lives of many. So his goodly comrades made godlike Sarpedon to sit beneath a fair oak tree of aegis-bearing Zeus, and valiant Pelagon, that was his dear comrade, thrust forth from his thigh the ashen spear, and his spirit failed him, and mist overspread his eyes. Then breathed he again, and the breath of the north wind blew round about him, and brought him to life from the grievous swoon of his soul. Hector noticed poor Sarpedon lying there helplessly, heard him calling out for help, but passed him by without saying a word, prioritizing instead pushing back the Greeks while the Trojans suddenly had the momentum. Poor Sarpedon. Some of the Trojans, at least, are able to get Sarpedon under a tree. Significantly, it's an oak tree, and oaks are strongly associated with Zeus, his father. And now that giant spear still sticking through Sarpedon's leg finally gets addressed. one of Sarpedon's comrades, a guy named Pelagon, steps forward to help. This is an important moment, although Pelagon himself isn't particularly important. There are a lot of guys named Pelagon in Greek mythology, and none of them are central to any stories. This Pelagon is no different. What's important is what happens when Pelagon pulls the spear out, pushes it all the way through Sarpedon's leg, really. Because notice what the narrator says here. Mist overspread his eyes. In the original Greek, it's even more clear. Sarpedon dies here. Author Elton Barker points out that this phrase, mist overspread his eyes, in every other instance of its use, indicates a character has died. The Iliad was part of a genre of orally recited poetry. It was performed for an audience, and the audience would be listening and reacting to cues like this. We can imagine that. Even if only a few of them caught this subtlety, their reactions would let others know that something unique just happened. Because when Sarpedon breathes again and the north wind suddenly raises and swirls around him, his death and quick return to life are only part of his story. We'll get back to Sarpedon later, much later in the Iliad. But when we do, we'll be primed to recognize Sarpedon as an important character, despite the infrequency of his appearances. Now the Argives, before the face of Ares and mail-clad Hector, neither turned them round about toward their black ships, nor charged forward in battle, but still fell backward when they heard of Ares amid the Trojans. And now, who first was slaughtered, and who last? By Hector, son of Priam, and brazen Ares, even godlike Teuthras, and thereafter Orestes the charioteer, and Trecos, spearman of Aetolia, and Oenomaus, and Helenos, son of Oenops, and Orespios with gleaming taslets, who dwelt in Hyle, and had great care of his substance, lying beside the Cephisian mere, and near him dwelt all the Boeotians, inhabiters of a rich, full domain. We leave Sarpedon now and return to the main action of the battle, where Hector, aided by Ares, is pushing the Greeks toward their ships. Led by Diomedes, the Greeks are keeping together in a slow, controlled retreat in which they are stepping backward so that they can continue to face the Trojans to defend themselves. However, their defense is not perfect, and Hector is indeed managing to kill some of the Greeks, adding a whopping 6 to his count here: Teuthras, Orestes, Trecos, Oenomaus, Helenos, and Orespios. No big names here. There just seems to be nothing out there on any of these guys. These 6 are just a list of names, mostly recycled from other places in mythology. For instance, Orestes is the name of Agamemnon's son, but not this Orestes. He's just a name. Helenos is the name of one of Hector's own brothers. Did Hector just kill his own brother? No, not at all. This Helenos is just a name. Only a couple of them even get their homeland identified. So in lieu of any interesting side character backstories, I wanted to share a post I found on the Kiwi Hellenist blog, where he has a whole write-up on the kill-death ratio in the Iliad, a leaderboard of who got the most kills, and most impressively, a link to the spreadsheet he made to compile all the deaths in the Iliad, and who killed who, how, in what book, and so on. All the stats. Who's going to kill Pylamenes the second time around? This spreadsheet has it all. You shouldn't be surprised that the top of the leaderboard with 28 named character kills is Hector, who is really making things tough on the Greeks right now. How will they get out of this predicament? Now, when the white-armed goddess Hera marked them making havoc of the Argives in the press of battle, anon she spake winged words to Athene. Out on it, thou daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus, unwearied maiden! Was it for naught we pledged our word to Menelaus, that he should not depart till he had laid waste well-walled Ilios? If thus we let baleful Ares rage, go to now, let us twain also take thought of impetuous valor. So said she, and the bright-eyed goddess Athene disregarded not. Hera is watching what's happening to the Greeks, and as you'd guess, she is not happy. You would also likely guess that she would call on Athene to help her turn things around. And you would be right. We've seen this before. Hera is the Greeks' most vocal defender, and Athene is the warrior goddess most in support of the Greek side. What you might not expect, and it's pretty unique to this situation, is what happens next. Hera has just said it when speaking to Athene. Let us twain also take thought of impetuous valor. Yes, yes. Hera is about to join Athene on a divine field trip to the battlefield. So Hera, the goddess queen, daughter of great Kronos, went her way to harness the gold front-legged steeds, and Hebe quickly put to the car the curved wheels of bronze, eight-spoked, upon their axle tree of iron. Golden is their felloe, imperishable, and tires of bronze are fitted thereover, a marvel to look upon, and the naves are of silver, to turn about on either side. And the car is plated tight with gold and silver thongs, and two rails run about it, and the silver pole stood out therefrom. Upon the end bound she the fair golden yoke, and set thereon the fair breaststraps of gold. And Hera led beneath the yoke the horses fleet of foot, and hungered for strife and the battle cry. And Athene, daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus, cast down at her father's threshold her woven vesture many-colored, that herself had wrought and her hands had fashioned, and put on her the tunic of Zeus the cloud-gatherer, and arrayed her in her armor for dolorous battle. About her shoulders cast she the tasseled aegis terrible, whereon is panic as a crown all round about, and strife is therein, and valor, and a horrible onslaught withal. And therein is the dreadful monster Gorgon's head, dreadful and grim, portent of Aegis-bearing Zeus. Upon her head set she the two-crested golden helm with fourfold plate, bedecked with men-at-arms of 100 cities. Upon the flaming chariot set she her foot, and grasped her heavy spear, great and stout, wherewith she vanquished the ranks of men, even of heroes with whom she of the awful sire is wroth. Then Hera swiftly smote the horses with the lash. Self-moving groaned upon their hinges the gates of heaven, whereof the hours are wanderers, to whom is committed great heaven and Olympus, whether to throw open the thick cloud, or set it to. There, through the gates, guided they their horses patient of the lash. And they found the son of Kronos, sitting apart from all the gods, on the topmost peak of many-ridged Olympus. Then the white-armed goddess Hera stayed her horses, and questioned the most high Zeus, the son of Kronos, and said, Father Zeus, hast thou no indignation with Ares for these violent deeds? How great and goodly a company of Achaeans hath he destroyed, recklessly and in an unruly wise, unto my sorrow. But here in peace the Cyprian and Apollo of the silver bow take their pleasure, having set on this mad one that knoweth not any law. Father Zeus, wilt thou at all be wroth with me if I smite Ares and chase him from the battle in sorry plight? This is a great arming scene. Every big battle has to have one as part of the lead-up. I'm thinking about that classic horror comedy movie, The Evil Dead 2, which had a particularly memorable arming scene. In that movie, Bruce Campbell's character Ash arms himself with a chainsaw to replace the hand he lost, uses it to saw off the end of his shotgun, holsters the shotgun behind his back, and says, groovy. Hera and Athene are doing some groovy arming for battle now, starting with Hera. There's a lot of description of the chariot as Hera and the servant goddess Hebe are getting it ready to ride. It's all made of gold and silver. Meanwhile, Athene is getting ready to fight. She's been wearing her normal feminine clothing while lounging around on Olympus. In addition to being a warrior goddess, she's also the goddess of weaving, and so she's imagined to have a magnificent everyday outfit that she would have made herself, as this was something all accomplished women of the day did. We don't see much in the way of female characters in the Iliad, but from how we've seen the male characters depicted, it shouldn't be surprising to learn that ancient Greek culture had gender roles as strict for women as we've seen it had for men. So, Athene swaps out her everyday lounging around the palace outfit for something more appropriate for battle, putting on Zeus's tunic and the Aegis of Zeus. The very heavy implication is that she's bringing the authority of Zeus to the battlefield by donning his gear. The Aegis is a weird thing. We've discussed it a bit here and there, but now let's take an in-depth look at this most mysterious of ancient Greek mythological things. The Aegis. Where to begin? In all likelihood, Even the ancient Greeks didn't have a clear conception of just what the aegis was, and it seems to have likely been the result of several very different ideas from different eras and cultures colliding and combining over a long period of time to form the amalgamated, complex thing it had become by the time of the Iliad's writing. Let's start with a purely physical description so you can imagine what we're talking about. In the show notes, I've linked to 3 different statues of Athene wearing the aegis as the ancients imagined it to appear, 2 of which I took at the National Archaeological Museum of Naples this past summer, and the 3rd links to a page, a photo on theoi.com. Or just Google the phrase Athena Farnese, that's Farnese, and you'll see yet another statue of Athene wearing the aegis. This 3rd statue was apparently also at that same museum, and somehow I missed it, which is crazy. I spent hours and hours there. It was incredible. Anyway, you'll see in all 3 of these statues are 3 commonalities among these different descriptions of the aegis. So the 3 commonalities. 1, the aegis is some kind of shawl or loose, untailored garment, which would be consistent with an animal skin. 2, snakes feature heavily in all 3, forming an edging with the snakes serving as like tassels along the edge of the shawl. And 3, you'll see a flattened face on all 3 versions of the aegis. That flattened face represents the head of the female monster Medusa, which is still a fairly well-known name. She was a gorgon, which was a class of monsters who could turn people to stone with their gaze. So even from this brief physical description of the aegis, you can see already that we have a whole mass of various concepts all jammed together. Why snakes? Why Medusa's head? Why an animal skin worn as a shawl? The aegis seems to have originally been a goat skin, which doesn't sound all that imposing to us, and by itself wouldn't have sounded imposing to the ancient Greeks of the Bronze or Iron Ages either. But the history of mythology surrounding the aegis stretches way back to a time when animal skins would have been the top choice for armor. And that's the basis of the aegis, this shawl-like garment all 3 of these statues show Athene wearing. But that's only the start of what the aegis was, because we've got these other elements in it, the snakes, the Medusa head, and the very name aegis, which was just loaded with heavy symbolic meaning to the ancients, reverberating throughout legend. Over the years, I've read any number of things about the aegis, various theories about what it meant, its origins, and there are so many different ideas surrounding it. At this point, let's just dive into the mass of concepts, and we'll pull it all together by the end. The snakes. Athene's cult worship was all about them. Snakes were of the earth. According to the ancient Greeks, chthonic was their word, meaning something arising from the earth or associated with it. The most ancient ceremonies surrounding Athene's worship involved snakes. They were a natural fit. Snakes came up out of the earth. They slithered down into holes in the earth. They were associated with the earth itself in the minds of the ancient Greeks. The Medusa head. That was a gift to Athene from Perseus, a hero of an earlier generation, whom Athene had guided as she's guiding Diomedes here in Book 5. He had defeated the Medusa and her stone gaze by using the reflective shield Athene had given him. But these are the decorative elements of the aegis. To get to the real meaning, we have to get deeper into it, its role, and the complex history of the word aegis. Armor and war and gearing up for war. It wasn't just about getting a job done. It was about scaring the enemy too. Maybe they would get flustered and not fight well. Maybe they would even run off. Wow, that would be a great outcome, victory by default. There were warrior dances intended to scare enemies. Human cultures throughout all times have had displays of military might, from the haka of the Maori to the massive military parades of the Soviets. The ancient Greeks were no different. Zeus, in the earliest mythologies, was associated strongly with warrior dances. His birth was secret. The infant Zeus kept in hiding to prevent his father Kronos from devouring him, as he had devoured all of Zeus's siblings. To keep Kronos in heaven from hearing the crying of baby Zeus, The warriors, known as the Coretes, danced their loud warrior dance, clashing their shields and swords continually to drown out the baby's cries. A paper I read recently while researching the Aegis helped me to put these concepts together somewhat. I say somewhat because it seems that these ideas never all did quite go together for the ancients. The Aegis was a big, complicated cultural concept where lots of ideas collided and all kind of stuck together, despite never really fitting into place like puzzle pieces. Since it was Christmas earlier this week as I write this, it occurred to me that our modern cultural concept of Christmas might come across to others as a similarly confused mass of jumbled ideas. Christmas is about the birth of Jesus, right? Then who's Santa Claus? He was St. Nicholas from the 300s in what is now Turkey, somehow transformed into a supernatural guy who lives at the North Pole? How did decorating a tree get involved? That's from pre-Christian practices, right? And we somehow carried it forward? Queen Victoria's German husband, Prince Albert, played a role in bringing Christmas trees to the English-speaking world, I think. I could go on and on about the complicated cultural thing that is Christmas. The Aegis was similar. So the paper I read, which of course is linked in the show notes, is by an R.L. Fowler and is titled Alpha, Iota, Gamma in Early Greek Language and Myth. He traces out the complicated history of this short word, AIG, and the story of the Aegis gets caught up into it. I won't pretend to say that I followed every nuance of his arguments, but here's what I got from it. This short word, AIG, likely came into Greek from two different sources, and from these two sources carried several, as in more than just two meanings. And these various meanings each carried their own different symbolic importance, all of which got deposited upon the Aegis, in addition to contributing to a number of other aspects of ancient Greek mythology and place names, which I won't complicate matters by going into here. When the ancestors of the Greek-speaking peoples arrived into what is now Greece, they were not the first people there. And many of the place names those earlier people had for locations around Greece remained, even as those early Greek people continued speaking their early Greek language. Given the prevalence of this AIG word in association with pre-Greek place names for seas or places near the sea, such as the Aegean Sea itself, it seems this pre-Greek language used AIG or something very like it as their word for sea. And so from there, we get a whole set of cultural concepts. The sea itself, which in that part of the world is associated with storms. To the early Greeks, this association with storms made them immediately think of their primary god, Zeus, who to them was the god of lightning. This early version of Zeus would have had the offensive power of lightning as a major attribute, and he would have had some form of armor, which in the times before metalworking would have been an animal skin. And these early Greeks would have noticed the similarity of the local word AIG, which meant sea, and their own word AIG, which had a number of very different meanings. These Greek meanings of AIG seem to have included the oak, like the oak tree, which was sacred to Zeus, and quick movements, which in their mind were associated with the quick movements of goats, like the goat skin of Zeus's ancient defensive goatskin armor. The Greeks would also have learned from the locals about their goddess, Athene, who was protector of cities and whose worship involved creating and placing a new garment on her statue. Religion back then was very different than it is today. No one gave a lot of thought to dogma or theology. Religion was about recognizing the gods that had power over various aspects of life and placating those gods so they would continue to provide whatever was needed from their area of authority. Athene was the goddess who protected the city. The newcomers to Greece were very conservative. And so, of course, they carried on the traditions which placated her, so she would continue to protect the cities now that they were living in them. And they would have asked themselves questions like, how does this new goddess Athene fit in with our old gods like Zeus? She seems really important. She must be his daughter, his favorite daughter. So now we've got a lot of ideas coming together. The Aegis is defensive, associated both with the original goatskin armor of Zeus and now with the worship of Athene and the traditions of making and putting a new garment on the statue of the goddess. The aegis is also offensive, a weapon associated both with the lightning of Zeus, which is quick like a goat and thereby goatskin from which it is made, but also with the terrifying tradition of the pre-battle warrior dance. This terror is augmented with the addition of the Medusa head, drawn from Greek mythology and from the pre-Greek association of Athene with snakes. It's vaguely associated with the sea, in that the sea is stormy and Zeus is the god of storms. Not all of these ideas come together nicely, but then do all the ideas of Christmas fit together perfectly? No, they weren't designed puzzles, they were stumbled upon piles of ideas. But now that they're all jumbled together in our minds, the symbols of one area bleed into other areas and reinforce them with these powerful feelings that the mystery of symbols evoke in us. And that is how the ancients saw the aegis, this powerful, terrifying symbol of Zeus and Athene, made all the more powerful by the multiplicity of its symbolic meanings and the mystery of how they all must fit together somehow, but it's all just beyond our understanding. That's your biography of the aegis. Now, let's get back to the battle. Athene arms herself, changing from her gown into armor, and she dons herself with the aegis of Zeus, the tasseled aegis terrible, whereon is panic as a crown all round about. And strife is therein, and valor, and horrible onslaught withal, and therein is the dreadful monster Gorgon's head, dreadful and grim. There continues an extensive description of Athene arming, and then Hera and Athene get into their flying chariot and swing by the front of Olympus, where Hera asks Zeus if he'll be mad at her if they go down and chase Ares off the battlefield. And Zeus the cloud gatherer answered her and said, "Go to now. Set upon him Athene, driver of the spoil, who is most wont to bring sore pain upon him." Okay. Hera and Athene have Zeus's blessing to rout Ares. Let's do this. The white-armed goddess Hera disregarded not and lashed her horses. They, nothing loth, flew on between earth and starry heaven, as far as a man seeth with his eyes into the haze of distance, as he sitteth on a place of outlook and gazeth upon the wine-dark sea. So far leaped the loudly neighing horses of the gods. Now when they came to Troy, and the two flowing rivers, even to where Simoeis and Scamandrios joined their streams, there the white-armed goddess Hera stayed her horses, and loosed them from the car, and poured thick mist round about them. And Simoeis made ambrosia spring up for them to graze. So the goddesses went their way with step like unto turtle doves, being fain to bring succor to the men of Argos. Hera and Athene take off in their flying chariot, the horses at every bound going as far as someone perched atop a high place can see from horizon to horizon. They land on the plain of Troy, where the rivers Scamander and Simoeis meet, and the god of Simoeis causes the river to flow with ambrosia for the divine horses to drink. The goddesses cast an obscuring mist over the horses and chariot. And when they were now come where the most and most valiant stood, thronging about mighty Diomedes, tamer of horses, in the semblance of ravening lions or wild boars whose strength is nowise feeble, then stood the white-armed goddess Hera, and shouted in the likeness of great-hearted Stentor, with voice of bronze, whose cry was loud as the cry of 50 other men. "Fie upon you, Argives, base things of shame, so brave in semblance! While yet noble Achilles entered continually into battle, then issued not the Trojans even from the Dardanian gate, for they had dread of his terrible spear. But now fight they far from the city at the hollow ships." So saying, she aroused the spirit and soul of every man. Leaving the chariot and horses parked by the river, Hera and Athene march on foot to where the fighting is thickest, which of course is around Diomedes. Mimicking the voice of a man named Stentor, Hera shouts, "For shame upon you, Greeks! When you had Achilles, the Trojans were kept penned up within their city." Now, this Stentor, the person whose appearance Hera took on to do this shouting, he was herald of the Greeks. In the Scholia of later mythology, he's said to have been involved in a shouting contest with Hermes, in which Stentor died. We get the phrase stentorian voice from this incident, a loud, authoritative voice, which is a reference you might occasionally see here and there, and now you'll know where it comes from. Having been reprimanded by Hera, the Greeks' fury level is raised in battle. And to Tydides' side sprang the bright-eyed goddess Athene. That lord she found beside his horses and chariot, cooling the wound that Pandaros with his dart had pierced. for his sweat vexed it by reason of the broad baldric of his round shield. Therewith was he vexed, and his arm grew weary. So he was lifting up the baldric and wiping away the dusky blood. Then the goddess laid her hand up upon the horse's yoke, and said, Of a truth, Tydeus begat a son little after his own likeness. Tydeus was short of stature, but a man of war. Yea, even when I would not have him fight nor make display. What time he came apart from the Achaeans on an embassage to Thebes, to the midst of the multitude of the Cadmeans, I bade him feast in their halls at peace. But he, possessing his valiant soul as of old time, challenged the young men of the Cadmeans, and in everything vanquished them easily. So sure a helper I was unto him. But for thee, beside thee stand I, and guard thee, and with all my heart bid thee fight the Trojans. Yet either hath weariness of much striving entered into thy limbs, or disheartening terror taken hold of thee. If that be so, no offspring art thou of Tydeus, the wise son of Oeneus. Athene goes to Diomedes and finds him struggling with the wound that Pandaros had dealt him, and says, You're not much compared to your father, who always charged ahead into battle, even when I suggested that he take it easy. And here you are, apparently stricken with fear. Now, this is surely just to raise Diomedes' ire, to get him even more furious for battle. Athene had indeed been a big supporter of Tydeus, but of course Diomedes will have something to say for himself. And stalwart Diomedes made answer to her and said, I know thee, goddess daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus. Therefore with my whole heart will I tell thee my thought, and hide it not. Neither has disheartening terror taken hold upon me, nor any faintness. But I am still mindful of thy behest that thou didst lay upon me. Thou forbadest me to fight face to face with all the blessed gods, save only if Zeus's daughter Aphrodite should enter into battle, then to wound her with the keen bronze. Therefore do I now give ground myself, and have bidden all the Argives likewise to gather here together, for I discern Ares lording it in the fray. So Diomedes has responded, I feel no fear. I'm just following your instructions not to fight against any god other than Aphrodite. And here we have Ares against us. I'm just following your instructions, Athene. Then the bright-eyed goddess Athene answered him, Diomedes, son of Tydeus, thou joy of mine heart, fear thou not, for that neither Ares nor any of the other immortals, so great a helper am I to thee. Go to now, at Ares first guide thou thy whole-hooved horses, and smite him hand to hand, nor have any awe of impetuous Ares raving here, a curse incarnate. The renegade, that of late in converse with me and Hera pledged him to fight against the Trojans and give succor to the Argives, but now consorteth with the Trojans and hath forgotten these. Athene is very happy with Diomedes for having been obedient, and of course she's happy with him anyway. He's one of her absolute favorites, and he's been killing it this whole time. And now Athene tells Diomedes and us something new. We, the audience, knew already that Athene had come down to the battlefield to chase off Ares so the Greeks wouldn't be routed today. But we don't yet know how she's going to do this. Athene now tells Diomedes that he doesn't need to fear Ares. She tells him to get right up close to Ares and to strike him. And she throws some insults at Ares. He's a liar, and he's two-faced. Just now he's telling the gods that he would support the Greeks. Look what he's doing instead. So she's enraging Diomedes against the god of war himself. And we, the audience, have learned this way, that it won't just be Athene chasing off Ares. No, no, no. Diomedes is going to be involved as well. Man versus god of war. This is what I've been looking forward to the very most about Book 5, the pinnacle of the Aristeia of Diomedes, when he goes up against the god of war himself. Let's get ready. So speaking, with her hand, she drew back Stephanelos and thrust him from the chariot to earth, and instantly leapt he down. So the goddess mounted the car by noble Diomedes' side, right eagerly. The oaken axle creaked loud with its burden, bearing the dread goddess and the man of might. Athene throws Stephanelos from the chariot. There was no need for this. He would have happily stepped aside for her. But she's being extra right now, and who could blame her? In Greek mythology, the god of war is not the best god of war. Athene is, and this is her moment. Diomedes jumps in. Athene gets into the chariot too. And while she may appear to be a young woman armed for battle, there's a fascinating little detail here where the chariot loudly creaks when she jumps in. Her true measure is divine, and her power is reflected in that hidden weight. Then Pallas Athene grasped the whip and reins. Forthwith against Ares first she guided the whole-hooved horses. Now he was stripping huge Periphas, most valiant far of the Aetolians, Ocesius' glorious son. Him was blood-stained Ares stripping, and Athene donned the helm of Hades, that terrible Ares might not behold her. Athene wastes no time. She grabs the reins and immediately drives the chariot right at Ares. Ares, at this moment, is taking a little pause from battling Greeks and rousing Trojans. In fact, he's a little distracted at the moment. Ares is bent over, squatting on the ground, busy stripping the armor from a dead man. We shouldn't be surprised to learn that stuff equals honor for the gods as well, who were very, very anthropomorphic in these pre-theology days, when the attributes of gods weren't things like omniscience and omnipotence, and instead the gods just were super souped up humans. Now Athene dons the cap of Hades. This is part of what is in fact a far more intricate and cunning plan than we were expecting, since it seemed like Athene had just charged into battle without thought, so eager to fight that she flung poor Sthenelus to the ground. Nope, Athene always has a plan. The Helm of Hades is another one of those mythological items, like the Aegis itself, which crops up here and there in various stories. The helm is kind of on par with the lightning bolt of Zeus and the trident of Poseidon. It's the item which is the symbol of a major god, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades being the three major gods of the cosmological order, each ruling a realm of sky, sea, and earth. It's not explained here how Athene got her hands on the helm. We can imagine she went down to the underworld and asked to borrow it when she was coming up with this whole plan off screen. What the Helm of Hades does is it makes its wearer invisible. Even gods cannot see other gods wearing it. So now, not only is Athene mounted on a chariot while Ares is distracted and on foot, but Ares won't see that Athene is on the chariot. What will Ares see when that chariot comes charging down upon him? Just the puny little mortal warrior Diomedes. A nothing, a pesky fly, to be swatted away. Now, when Ares, scourge of mortals, beheld noble Diomedes, he left huge Periphas lying there, where at the first he had slain him and taken away his life, and made straight at Diomedes, tamer of horses. Now, when they were come nigh in onset on one another, first Ares thrust over the yoke and horse's reins with spear of bronze, eager to take away his life. But the bright-eyed goddess Athene, with her hand, seized the spear and thrust it up over the car to spend itself in vain. The chariot is approaching Ares, who finally looks up from his corpse looting and sees it's only Diomedes. Meh. The chariot is still a little ways away, but charging rapidly toward the god of war. Unconcerned, Ares levels his spear, aims at Diomedes, and throws. Piece of cake. But Ares is not expecting what happens next, because there's no explanation for it that he can see. Athene, invisible, grabs Ares' spear right out of the air and deflects it up and over the chariot, causing it to pass harmlessly over their heads as the chariot passes. It looks like it got knocked by something, deflected, as though it hit a shield or something, and continued on a new course. Just a weird thing, a fluke. Maybe Ares' eyes were playing tricks on him. Even Ares can miss a spear cast every once in a while. He still has no idea what's about to happen to him. Next, Diomedes of the loud war cry attacked with spear of bronze, and Pallas Athene drave it home against Ares' nethermost belly, where his taslets were girt about him. There smote he him and wounded him, rending through his fair skin, and plucked forth the spear again. Then brazen Ares bellowed loud as 9,000 warriors or 10,000 cry in battle as they join in strife and fray. Thereat trembling gat a hold of Achaeans and Trojans for fear. O mightily bellowed Ares, insatiate of battle. With the chariot now bearing down upon him, Diomedes, obeying Athene's plan, drives his spear right into Ares' belly, and then pulls the spear out again, mine, yoink, like a boss. A Bronze Age boss. Ares let loose a bellow of pain so loud it would take 9,000 or 10,000 men to equal it. everyone, every single human on that battlefield cowers in fear. They have never heard anything so terrifying as the pain of Ares. Even as gloomy mist appears from the clouds, when after a heat a stormy wind ariseth, even so to Tydeus' son Diomedes, brazen Ares appeared amid clouds, faring to wide heaven. And Ares is gone, immediately in pain and shame. Ares takes the form of dark mist and ascends right out of the battle. Where does he go? He goes crying to Daddy, straight to the seat of Zeus on Olympus. Swiftly came he to the god's dwelling, steep Olympus, and sat beside Zeus, son of Cronos, with grief at heart, and showed the immortal blood flowing from the wound, and piteously spake to him winged words, Father Zeus, hast thou no indignation to behold these violent deeds? For ever cruelly suffer we gods by one another's devices, in showing men grace. With thee are we at all at variance, because thou didst beget that reckless maiden and baleful, whose thought is ever of iniquitous deeds. For all the other gods that are in Olympus hearken to thee, and we are subject every one. Only her thou chasteneth not, neither in deed nor word, but setteth her on, because this pestilent one is thine own offspring. Now hath she urged on Tydeus' son, even overweening Diomedes, to rage furiously against the immortal gods. The Cyprian first he wounded in close fight, in the wrist of her hand, and then assailed he me, even me, with the might of a god. Howbeit my swift feet bear me away, else had I long endured anguish there, amid the grisly heaps of dead, or else had lived strengthless from the smitings of the spear. Ares complains to Zeus. He's got a lot to say to his father about all this. First off, Dad, aren't you angry about all this on my behalf? All us gods are obedient to you. We're all at war because you will it. And now I've gotten hurt. And it's all because you went and had this out-of-control daughter, Athene. She doesn't know any limits. Now she's incited this mortal Diomedes to attack first Aphrodite and now me. I would have lived strengthless out there if I hadn't been able to escape so quickly. And I'm going to step back from Ares ranting for a moment, because that's an interesting concept there, to think that Ares would have lived strengthless. I think it calls to mind our earlier discussion of ambrosia and nectar, the divine food and drink of the gods, being the source of their ichor, that fluid which they have instead of blood, and which is somehow associated with their divinity. But whereas the author we were discussing earlier attributed Aphrodite's agelessness to the ichor, which she lost when Diomedes struck with a spear, here it seems that Ares is attributing his strength to the ichor. And he's saying that if he'd remained on the battlefield until all of his ichor, I want to say bled out, but we would need a verb specific to ichor. If Ares had ichored out, then he would have been without strength. There are a few stories here and there where gods are without their divine sustenance, and we can imagine they are weakened by the lack of it. One involving Ares himself, who was not only defeated by the giants Ephialtes and Otos, but then chained up by them and stuffed into a bronze cauldron for 13 months. He would have been very weak indeed after that long time without food or drink. Then Zeus the cloud gatherer looked sternly at him and said, Nay, thou renegade, sit not by me and whine. Most hateful to me art thou of all gods that dwell in Olympus. Thou ever lovest strife and wars and battle. Truly thy mother's spirit is intolerable, unyielding, even Hera's. Her can I scarce rule with words. Therefore I deem that by her prompting thou art in this plight. Yet will I no longer endure to see thee in anguish. Mine offspring art thou, and to me thy mother bare thee. But wert thou born of any other god unto this violence, long ere this hadst thou been lower than the sons of heaven. Zeus has no sympathy for Ares, none at all. He's honestly pretty harsh to his son here, calling Ares the god he hates the most, and ouch. And Zeus saying to Ares that you've got your mother Hera's spirit, which is not a compliment coming from Zeus, who's the original take my wife please kind of guy. And then Zeus is a little disingenuous with Ares, implying that it was Hera's involvement which got Ares into this situation, which is only half the truth, because Zeus gave his blessing to Hera and Athene's mission to remove Ares from the battlefield. Zeus finally gives Ares a break, not wanting to see him suffer anymore, not for Ares' sake, but seemingly because it bothers Zeus to see Ares in pain. As a parting insult, Zeus says, "If you weren't my son, Ares, I'd have thrown you into the deep pit of Tartarus long ago for being such a violent guy." Yikes! Not much in the way of fatherly love here. No wonder the poor kid turned out so bad. So spake he, and bid Paeon heal him. And Paeon laid assuaging drugs upon the wound, and healed him, seeing he was in no wise of mortal mold. Even as fig juice maketh haste to thicken white milk, that is liquid but curdleth speedily as a man stirreth, even so swiftly healed he impetuous Ares. And Hebe bathed him, and clothed him in gracious raiment, and he sate him down by Zeus son of Cronos, glorying in his might. Then fared the twain back to the mansion of great Zeus, even Hera of Argos and Alcmene Athene, having stayed Ares, scourge of mortals, from his manslaying. After berating his injured son, Zeus finally calls for the healing god Paeon to put Ares out of everyone's misery. In later mythology, you might come across the name Paeon with the implication that this is another way of referring to Apollo, like Pallas is another way of referring to Athene. But here in the Iliad, Paeon is pretty clearly a separate god from Apollo, sort of the divine embodiment of a physician. So Ares is finally healed and bathed and gets to feel glorious again. And having chased Ares from the battle, Hera and Athene return to Olympus. Mission accomplished. Wow, that's it. Book 5 was an absolute beast of a book, just action the whole way. Next time we'll take on Book 6, which continues this very same day of battle. There's so much more to go. Book 6 will feature a whole lot more combat, and quality time with Hector, the preeminent hero of the Trojans. We'll follow Hector as he interacts with many of the important people of the Trojan army and the Trojan royal family. It will be our insight into the enemy, the very human story of the Trojans who are defending their city against an existential threat. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.